Hello there, my horror lovelies. Welcome to a new decade full of new scares and new exciting things. Today, in honor of Nicolas Pesce's new upcoming Grudge reboot dropping tomorrow, I thought it would be fun to take you down the long, convoluted history of the long-running, always terrifying J-horror series of flicks known as Ju-on or The Grudge. I'm going to be sticking to the main continuity here, so I'm not going to be talking about any of the litany of spin-offs or alternate timelines or weird crossovers like Sadako vs. Kayako, even though I would very much like to. Just the main timeline and an overview of the series. Strap in, kids. It's a lot. The Ju-on franchise is the brainchild of Japanese filmmaker Takashi Shimizu, and it follows a very simple but very effective premise. Based on the Onryo Japanese horror stories, the Grudge franchise is based on something of a simple concept. When someone dies in a particularly violent or vengeful way, it leaves behind a scar in the form of a curse that manifests in the form of all of their anger and pain, and that curse stays behind in the place of their death and acts like a virus, and lashes out and kills anybody who it comes in contact with. It can't be reasoned with, it can't be stopped, and that's ultimately what makes this franchise and this concept so scary. There's no way of escaping this curse. It's not like The Ring, where there's a way of transferring it to somebody else. Once you're marked, you're dead. Nowhere's safe. You can't outrun it, you can't escape it. Eventually, it's gonna find you, and it's gonna get you, and it's gonna get you in a place where you should be safe. In the shower, in a phone booth, even in your own bed. The series is ultimately focused on one small house in Japan, and it's sort of an anthology featuring several non-linear but intersecting stories where people enter the house and are cursed, pursued, and killed by its inhabiting spirits Toshio and Kayako, both of whom were murdered in a fit of vengeful rage by their father and husband. Now they both reside permanently in the house and kill anybody who sets foot inside. Their looks are inspired by Japanese kabuki theater, and their white-painted bodies and the unique and disturbing sounds that they both make end up making the two of them very recognizable and incredibly iconic. Everyone is familiar with Kayako's death rattle, and it really has become one of the most uniquely terrifying, unnerving sounds in horror history. The Ju-on franchise began as a series of short films, Katasumi and 44444444444. They're both fairly simple short films, ultimately just being one creepy scenario that leads up to the introduction of our two spirits, Kayako and Toshio. But tonally speaking, they capture everything that makes the Ju-on franchise special. More on that in a minute. Following those two shorts, Shimizu came out with two direct-to-video follow-ups, Ju-on the Curse and Ju-on the Curse 2. And quite honestly, for me, this is the series at its best. These films are utterly chilling, but with an extremely minimalist nature that really adds to the rawness and the reality of them. The Grudge series works best when it comes to feelings of minimalism and isolation. And the extremely low-budget nature of these two films creates this feeling of emptiness and isolation and melancholy that only gets more and more sinister as you peel back the layers and uncover the mystery behind this story and what happened to the Seiki family. Kayako is a threat, sure, but ultimately she's a tragic character, eternally angry and in pain and trying to reach out. And the low-budget nature of these films really captures the essence of that sadness and pain. And it creates this sort of lonely atmosphere that I've never quite seen another film emulate in such a way. Following the successes of these two films, Shimizu released two theatrical follow-ups, probably the two that you are most familiar with aside from the American remakes, Ju-on the Grudge and Ju-on the Grudge 2. And while these films are technically sequels to Ju-on the Curse and its sequel, they also function as soft reboots of sorts, informing the wider audiences of what they missed in the first two films, as well as giving them the backstory of the Seiki house and what happened to Kayako and Toshio and Takeo. Ju-on the Grudge essentially does what its predecessors did, but with a slightly bigger budget. Again, it tells a series of non-linear but interconnecting stories about the people who enter the Seiki house and the horrible fates that befall them. Again, it carries the same tone of loneliness and isolation and dread, but with an actual budget now. The scares are ramped up. The quality of the film is better, but in my opinion that almost detracts from its scariness in a way. The thing that made its predecessors so effective is that they were shot in very low quality, and thus it felt more like reality. Ju-on the Grudge feels sleeker and a bit more like a film, which, for me at least, robs it a bit tonally. 2004 rolls around, and Sam Raimi teams up with Shimizu to bring his story to a wider audience and an American audience. Shimizu is back on board once again as a director, and we get the first American remake of The Grudge. It's a retelling of Ju-on, albeit slightly Americanized, with Sarah Michelle Gellar starring as an American social worker working in Japan, and she ends up in the Seiki house after the former social worker Yoko ends up disappearing. And this movie is honestly really good as far as American remakes of Japanese films go. The only thing I can compare it to otherwise is The Ring. And I'm sure a big part of that is due to Shimizu directing once again, and it's really impressive how well this film mirrors Ju-on The Grudge at times. It's the same film, sometimes shot for shot, but done with a Hollywood budget now. And in certain instances, that budget really works in its favor. Once again, it sacrifices something of that tone that's found in the first two direct-to-video films simply because of that Hollywood sleekness, but it makes up for it in how well some of the scares are upgraded, some dodgy CGI aside. Kayako, in my opinion, looks her absolute best in this film and its sequel, The Grudge 2. The makeup work is stellar, and it really serves to make both her and Toshio a lot more ghostly in their appearance. It's such a little thing, but the way her eyes are ringed in black in this film, as well as a much more corpse-like paint job on her skin, it really cements her look. And I actually prefer the iconic staircase scene in this film to the version in the original. The Grudge 2, once again directed by Shimizu, continues the same trend, following the first film directly and mostly centering on Karen's sister Aubrey. And while it's not quite as good as the first film, it does some really cool things and has some really inventive scares, and it leads to a much more interesting concept in its ending. The curse following somebody back home to America and continuing to spread there. And then we got The Grudge 3. And it sucked. This was the first Grudge film without Shimizu attached, and it really shows. Everything about this movie is a massive drop in quality from everything that came before it. The story is no longer non-linear, which right away just does away with everything that made the first few films so disjointed and weird and inventive, and because of that it strips away a huge layer of the tone entirely. On top of that, this is the first film in the entire series where Kayako is portrayed by someone other than Takako Fuji, and boy does it show how much of the character was in her performance. Because wow, this new Kayako is weak. No disrespect to Aiko Horiuchi, I'm sure she's a lovely woman, I'm sure she's a fantastic actor. And I'm sure she was doing her best, but this movie just had everything working against it. Her makeup job is atrocious, her movements look forced, her expressions are all wrong. There was an elegance that Takako Fuji brought to the role. She understood the character and the pain she was experiencing. Her makeup made her look like a corpse. She's gray, she's bloody, she's messy, she looks as though someone who was murdered would look. Aiko's makeup looks like a bad cosplay. There's no mess to it, it's just plain white. It's too clean. There's no pain in her performance. Her expressions just make her look like someone impersonating Kayako and trying to be scary, and as a result it just ends up looking goofy. Her movements are incredibly janky and just look forced, and again, it looks like she's trying to be scary, whereas Takako Fuji made all of the movements, as janky as they were, look effortless. And I'm not even going to touch how badly they butchered Toshio, because what the fuck. And basically, The Grudge 3 was so terrible that it sunk the American franchise for a decade until Nicolas Pesce came along and decided to reboot it with a sort of prequel, sort of sequel, sort of interquel, and give us the version that comes out tomorrow, and if it sucks, I'm going to be really disappointed. The Japanese timeline ended up thriving with a ton of spin-offs and crossover films happening. Ju-on Black Ghost White Ghost, Ju-on Beginning of the End, Sadako vs. Kayako, and while not all those films are necessarily good, I have a very distinct love for this franchise, and I think that it deserves a lot of respect, and so do Takashi Shimizu and Takako Fuji, for creating such a unique type of horror and creating one of the only stories that has ever truly scared me. It's a phenomenal series, and it's one that I really hope gets resuscitated with a new remake, reboot, whatever. As always, my lovelies, thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, click down there, like, comment, subscribe. If you're interested in becoming part of the Horror Pals community and the perks that come with it, please click the Patreon link below and consider donating. I would really appreciate it. You could be like all of these wonderful people right here, and even a donation as little as $1 would help me make new content like this for you all to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching once again. I love you all and I appreciate you very much. Here's to a new year. Here's to a new Grudge. I will see you all very soon.